Now, I can give you the short version of this, but this is really Vincent's material. But the geometry of the magnetic lines that cross the place where Kelly and Dee made gold look roughly like that. It's a pentacle. And that's true of the castle outside Prague where Kelly and Dee did their work. This is also true of the place where Nostradamus figured out he had to set up his tower in order to do the scrying which allowed him to see the future at Saint-Remy. And again, I refer to Vincent Bridges to complete that story because he's identified the actual locations of the pentacle around Saint-Remy, which is not that different from the pentacle around Rennes-le-Château called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. The physics is that this was a bioactive electric field type. Okay? The reason that you could see the future in the water, the plasma for the scrying of Nostradamus, was because the electric field around the plasma caused it to implode. All these are examples of bioactive electric field. So what happened was Queen Elizabeth was so jealous she had to send some of her best spies, and Shakespeare was being blackmailed by the Queen because of his uncle. Long story. This is Vincent's story. But she sent a guy named Francis Garland, who is the trade name for Queen Elizabeth's spies, who now Vincent has assembled dramatic academic evidence that that is William Shakespeare, who then went to Prague and was academically clear, spent several years learning alchemy with John Dee and Kelly. And so then Shakespeare, well, just the little part of this story, I want to just mention Midsummer Night's Dream, and I want to mention Tempest. We're going to discuss these as two different examples of bioactive electric field. So while they're in Prague, they realize the world might end if that stupid Catholics win the Spanish Armada. They had 1 year of planning notice, and so they made a bioactive electric field called the Tempest, which is the storm that took out the Spanish Armada. And Vincent has a lot of evidence of this. I find it's a great story, and I'm teaching it here for the educational value. I'm not the historian, I'm the scientist. As a scientist, I believe we know how and why that hurricane came out of the North Sea, which never generates hurricanes. In fact, there were the rabbis were at the 7 hills around Prague, and the 7 hills around Prague are 7 spins outside the 5 sacred temples in Prague, which is the 5 spins inside. So this was a magnetic map from which you got great leverage on the grid. And they did the activity called the Ophänomenocian calls, which is how you call the plasma field, which you call angels, which are stellar. And I have watched this activity, the Ophänomenocian calling all angels at work. I have watched this kind of activity call storms the size of continents. And I've seen that happen personally many times. So whether or not you believe it isn't important to me. What's important to me is the physics. The physics is we got a plasma tornado coming from the sun, and somebody needs to be steering. Hello? And that's why I'm recommending our project called Calling All Angels. And this alphabet of the Ophanim, called plasma residues of a hypercube, is the physics of how you embed your plasma into very large tornadoes. And that symmetry would be helpful if you could understand. We don't have time to play with those pictures right now. It's all at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. At any rate, they did the Ophänomenocian calls, and they called a storm big enough. And there are still Spanish people living on the wrong coast of England today who never got back from that storm. It's a wonderful historical story. But I'm just telling you that large storms are examples of bioactive fields, and they have pentacle centers, and the physics is instructive. Now, back up to Midsummer Night's Dream. We're going to get to the serious science here, but I think the psychology is an excellent introduction. In Midsummer Night's Dream, you have... See, actually, Shakespeare then got back to UK and actually dedicated his key plays to John Dee indirectly, as Vincent describes. Now, here, I wanted this other slide up here. But so when Shakespeare is writing Midsummer Night's Dream, he's designing a sequence of emotion to produce the alchemy of fusion of human biologic fields. In other words, remember the word chem as in alchemy means access to a black hole. Literally charge fusion, literally implosion, literally fractality, literally phase conjugation. So what's the challenge? The challenge is you got a group of people and you would like them to experience fusion. Whether you call it the physics of Tantra or the psychology of alchemy, what it means is that all of the different people in the play who are experiencing emotions in a sequence need to sequence those emotions like the stage doors of a play are opening and closing, but this can be done by a video editor, by the way, to do psychology of alchemy, by getting the consumed perspective at the right phase angle. So, you have couple number A who have love and then hate. Couple number B who have fear and then anger. And then couple number C, you have 4 couples, and you see their emotions coming and going, and you find yourself falling in to the feeling of the field of couple number A. And then you find yourself falling into the field of couple number B. And if you do that sequence of emotions in the correct timing, the symmetry angle of the plasma domains call that sequence of emotions. And I remind you of the physics of emotion. The wave shapes are well documented. The Centric work by Manfred Clynes is one good example. That we know the exact frequency ratio from the music literature which defines emotion. For example, joy 1/6. Well, I did. These are Manfred's waves. He got these interculturally around the world. This is my analysis of the geometry of the wave shape of touch, which defines emotion. Note that love is 1/golden mean, anger, etc. So at the Gurdjieff School, we did joy, pride, awe, anger, pity, fear. You do a sequence of emotion in a proper array, and you produce the possibility of fusion of plasma, which is to say implosion. Short story made long, the result was at the end of the play, Midsummer Night's Dream, you have experienced from each perspective in the correct sequence, so suddenly you feel for everyone as if they were one. You embedded, you phase locked, you fused. The physics of Tantra, the physics of psychology of emotion, it's literally the ability, e pluribus unum, to make many one. So that's why all the sort of literary critics say, Shakespeare's writing about the alchemy of psychology, which is really more than symbolic. It's physics of how human plasma fuses. Okay, so we had our fun with the Shakespeare story, philosopher, meteor, da-da-da. Let's move on to our next example of a bioactive electric field. A church. A temple. Remember we said that the Sumerian word for altar in church is Shem, a high-word firestone. I will raise an altar unto the Lord, a Shem stone. So Sitchin called it high-word firestone. I call it a fractal or phase conjugate dielectric capacitor. What's the principle? The principle is what is behind biologic architecture in general and sacred space in general, which is church. Well, we're using Michael Rice here. You want to credit dear Michael? Thank you. He should be back with us shortly. This is part of his holisticarchitecture.com, holistichouseplans.com, that's with an H, and now fractalgold.net, the virtual education to teach these things. The place in the church where the seed is going to germinate is simple. It's the place where waves agree. Is that easy? Not complicated. The place where waves agree, the role of mind among waves is to teach them to agree. You are a wave? Wave. So where in the church, the place which is able to cause germination is the place where the dielectric waves and the magnetic waves all converge non-destructively. Hint fractal, hint golden ratio, etc., etc. The point is, it's measurable. So the biologic architecture curriculum says, do not pay your architect until you take your seeds into the center of the building and determine if he's made a capacitor that causes a seed to germinate. And that's the point. This is another example. Bioactive electric field, stupa. Alternating layers of phase conjugate dielectric, gold. The curvature here, remember the curvature of the egg, what Steiner called projective geometry, etheric formative force, because he didn't know what a capacitor is. This is making the electric field that causes life. Yeah? So this ability to predict what's going to cause a seed to grow, if you do just a few experiments, and I need the right sequence of slides for this. We did just a few of our own. We know that the orgone people, Wilhelm Reich, who insist on calling it orgone instead of the correct word in physics, which is phase conjugate dielectric, they produce consistently and replicably about a 30% difference in seed growth by mass. So clearly this is a replicable physics. We notice that when you plant seeds in steel or aluminum, they die. When you plant seeds in, this is a phase conjugate dielectric, this is a dolman array that affects the weather, paramagnetic stone in a Sri Yantra about a half a mile across. You get dramatically improved germination. So think simply to yourself, I put my seeds in a steel and aluminum cup, they die. Even if they don't touch the cup. If I take the same seeds and the same water air in a stone or wood cup, they germinate. What is the difference? In essence, look, you know that we said yesterday the seed, what biologists call the life of the seed, is the plasm. Now, if the plasm can implode and suck charge because of its plasma, then you call that life. So basically, if there's no centripetal force, the fractal field, then obviously that seed is called dead. So electrically, how do you trigger that centripetal force? Well, actually, without teaching the principle, John Burke started a little business shooting a negative ion shower at the seeds to cause them to germinate better, which is a bit of a start. And Pat Flanagan was so helpful yesterday, showing us why a negative ion is a little fractal. Beautiful. So we're getting the right clue here. How would you measure that? Does anybody know? The way you measure it is you take a capacitor, just a little probe. I learned this from Professor Callahan when we made our documentary film with him, that you take a piece of hemp fiber, which is a wonderful capacitor, and you can measure whether a tree is going to die or live, whether its harmonics are inclusive or exclusive. So the way you measure the ability of a place to cause a seed to germinate, as we showed yesterday, remember when we were showing you how you measured life force in a plant or a fresh chicken egg? I have those measures up here. That the number of harmonics present, here's those slides. We got this out yesterday. So here's the pine cone we talked about. The pine cone gets voltage from gravity from its fractal. That's a bioactive electric field. This chicken egg is making 4 to 14 millivolts. And if your biology professor doesn't know where that voltage comes from, I suggest you fire him. That voltage is called life, and it came from gravity because it's fractal. And the way you get that voltage is you get what's called harmonic inclusiveness. So the same way you put that fresh egg or plum or apple in this capacitor, and this is the capacitor we're using for this. You see the picture here. This is a phase conjugate dielectric material in the trace mineral in the correct ceramic. Remember, the canopic jars were little batteries. Why? The same trace mineral that makes clay edible, good shaman know where edible dirt is, makes a phase conjugate dielectric because of its solubility. And that's how you make the right ceramic to turn water into wine. I mean, life, death into life, right? And you get it in the right geometry, macromolecularly as well as micromolecularly, the curvature of the angle that causes implosion, called egg shape, exquisitely exact. And then you coat it on the inside with the phase conjugate dielectric material, a thin film of gold, whose outer